Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today's guest is a renowned and highly respected writer, director, and playwright whose body of work reflects his long dedication to truth, honesty, and authenticity in his artistic expression. He trained with Lee Strasberg at the Actors Studio in New York, where he acted, wrote, and directed plays. He then made his way to Hollywood, first as an actor in movies including Psych-Out, Drive, he said, and The Last Movie, and then as a filmmaker. He wrote and directed such classics as A Safe Place, Sitting Ducks, Tracks, Can She Bake a Cherry Pie, Eating, Last Summer in the Hamptons, New Year's Day, Hollywood Dreams, Deja Vu, and my personal favorite, Train to Zakopane. He's worked with some amazing actors, including Jack Nicholson, Lee Grant, Maximilian Schell, Dennis Hopper, Roddy McDowell, Vanessa Redgrave, Faye Dunaway, David Duchovny, and he made 3 movies with Orson Welles, with whom he formed a deep friendship. In fact, in 2014, a fascinating book by film historian Peter Biskind was released entitled My Lunches with Orson, based on a series of previously unreleased recordings of private conversations between our guest and Orson Welles every week over lunch at the famous Ma Maison restaurant in Hollywood. The book provides the most riveting and revealing insight into the enigmatic, wickedly witty, and restlessly intelligent person that Orson Welles really was. Our guest is widely considered to be a cinematic genius and a true maverick of American cinema, so much so that he's the subject of a fascinating 1995 documentary entitled Who is Henry Jaglom? Well, my friends, you're about to find out. I'm delighted to welcome the one and only Henry Jaglom to our show. Henry, thank you so much for being here.
I can't live up to that buildup, though. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Whatever I do is like anticlimactic after your introduction, but thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. Henry, when I look at your body of work, and specifically your writing of characters and character development, it's clear that you identify strongly with the female psyche and the woman's perspective. So that leads me to ask you the obvious question. I want to know the impact your mother had on you.
That is the key question in that sense. My mother had a very unique influence on me. My father was a very powerful and driven person who was very loving, but very kind of correct and structured and disciplined, successful and disciplined person. And my mother was all over the place, a child woman in many ways, a spoiled, privileged sort of child woman who came from a wealthy family in Germany and married a man quite a bit older than her, my father, and had a life where he took care of everything. So she had the children, basically, but we had governesses and people like that. So the uniqueness of her connection with me was that she wanted a girl. She wanted a daughter. She had my older brother, a son, and now 6 years later, she wanted a girl and she got another boy. And my father said, that's it, no more children. And at that time, people of their position didn't have more than 2 children usually. So she decided, she told me many years later, so I said to myself, this one will be the girl, even though I'm genetically a boy. And so I think that's a huge part of the explanation of why I make the films I do, why I'm so focused on women and women's lives in the films. I watched my mother and her lady friends as I grew up, and then I started having girlfriends of my own, and I started seeing that the lives of women, one, were not being chronicled accurately in the movies that I grew up to love, but they were fantasies that had nothing to do with women's fantasies. They were usually male fantasies. And secondly, I wanted very much to probe the kind of truthful behavior of people that I didn't see reflected at that time in the 50s and early 60s on the screen. So I'd say that those are my motivational factors. Those are why I chose women's subjects like eating and baby fever and going shopping and so on. Things that are frequently dismissed in the male world, but that I think have an enormous effect on our entire lives, because we all have mothers. and girlfriends and women in our lives and so on. And then in my case, a daughter who just directed her first movie at 30, by the way, her first feature film, which is quite successful. I'm very excited to say. Sabrina Jaglom by name. One can look her up. Anyway, I think that's the basic introduction that I need to give you.
Well, first of all, congratulations to your daughter.
Thank
You
you.
began taking acting lessons at the age of 12, and you studied with Lee Strasberg at the Actors Studio and in his private classes. You've said many times that Lee Strasberg had a huge impact on your life. Tell me about that, Henry.
I wanted to be famous. I didn't care about art. I pretended to, but being acting, who cares? I wanted to be famous. I had a tremendous need and drive for some reason. And we can go into all the insecurities of childhood, whatever, to be famous. Wanting, look at me, wanting everybody to see me and so on. I wasn't taking seriously the idea of acting. But luckily, because my mother had a friend who knew Strasberg, I went to his classes. And I was still trying to show off, basically. And one day I was in his classes thinking, Christ, there's hundreds of people here, all these famous Paul Newman and everybody in the audience. How do I get this attention I need? I wasn't thinking about the work like I should have been. And a figure in the back of the theater where we had our classes showed up with a white scarf around her hair, came down to the aisle and sat on the row right next to me. So I was up on the stage with 5 other people. And now this 6th person comes in with her white scarf, sits down on the other end. So it's me, 5 people, and an empty seat, which Marilyn Monroe sits in that seat. That's who it was who was coming in. And I think, oh, it's crap. Who's going to pay attention? Now Marilyn Monroe is here on the stage with me. Who is going to pay any attention to me? I'm trying to get famous. I'm trying to get seen. As I later understood, it was really about being seen in some profound way, which is a movie I'm about to be doing, by the way, which reflects that subject. Nobody's gonna pay attention. And that thinking that Marilyn Monroe is sitting there and that they're all naturally watching her and nobody's looking at me made me giggle. I started laughing. And something about my laughter provoked her on the other end after the 5 other people between us, and she started sniffling. And that made me more hysterical because she was sniffling. It's Marilyn Monroe. So I started giggling. And the more I giggled, the more she sniffled. The more she sniffled, I started laughing. The more I was laughing, she was crying. And suddenly I thought, holy Christ, I am doing a scene with Marilyn Monroe. This is what I need. This is the famous moment. This is where everybody will pay attention. How can they not pay attention to little me? I'm doing a scene with Marilyn Monroe. And that made me hysterical, which made her cry and sob like you've never seen. And there was 5 people or 6 in between us, actors who are getting no attention because I know it's going back and forth. Everybody's looking at me and looking at Marilyn, looking up. And then now the scene is over. And Lee Strasberg, as he always did, starts talking to everybody left to right on the stage. Marilyn, that was darling, that was wonderful, that was very full, very rich behavior, very true. I liked what you did. You worked up, blah, blah, blah. Next person, Sam, I like that. I was true. Louise, very good. He comes to the person next to me and he said, Geraldine, I was really concerned. You reached a point. I was really proud of you. You did the work. Good for you. Class dismissed. So he doesn't talk to me. So he knows I'm full of shit. He knows that it was crap. He knows that it was not real. And everybody gets up and starts mingling and saying hello and all these incredibly famous people. And I'm left on the stage with 6 empty chairs and me, as everybody spends between next 20 minutes gathering and then going out. So I didn't take the thing seriously. I knew something was there that I didn't understand. And finally, after months and months of studying with Strasberg, he did a little something with me that made me cry. And I thought, cry, Jesus, there's something real going on here. This is not just bullshit. There is something real about this acting stuff. It's not just about getting famous or look at me, but something deeply emotionally powerful. And that introduced me to the world of the great work of creative artists who are performers, directors, writers, and so on.
Well, Lee Strasberg was known to have a foolproof bullshit detector. He was all about truth, honesty, full expression. And Henry, the last time you saw Lee Strasberg, he said to you, don't forget to be who you are. So I have to ask you, Henry,
How
Have you
did you know that?
ever
Oh,
had difficulty maintaining your authenticity?
no, no. To the displeasure of many people in my life, I have been insistently authentic to a point that can be very obnoxious and difficult for other people. I've been told, and I'm sure that's true. No, I obviously have a deep need that's not psychologically the most calm and healthy thing in the world to be honest, to be true, to be seen, I think is what it is. I'm about to make a movie actually on the subject of why actors need to be seen on such a large scale, what that need is. I'm fascinated by that subject now. And I had it. I needed it desperately. But thanks to Lee, I suddenly understood that it could become about work, not about just getting attention, but about the creative work of showing the human beings in all their complexity, which I felt was not available in the movies that I was growing up on. So I decided I wanted to make movies about that sort of thing.
You made the decision to leave the theater world in New York and go to Hollywood to pursue work in television and movies. Why do you prefer movies over the stage?
Lee never forgave me, neither did Harold Clurman. And I had written a play that they were very excited about, which became the movie A Safe Place, my first movie. And they thought I was going to be doing stuff in the theater that was going to be significant. And then I thought, no, that's not where I belong. Because when I was little and scared and lonely and frightened and needy, movies gave me everything I needed emotionally. That was the place I could go that made me feel whole, that made me feel okay, that gave me a sense of a bigger life that was meaningful and so on. So movies had an emotional appeal to me that theater never had. Theater was something we did. We went to a musical on Broadway on my birthday with a bunch of kids. Movies were an every week or every other week experience, and they were entering this world of feeling and emotion. And I saw that the one thing that was missing in these movies was women's lives, the true exploration of women's lives. And therefore, that's why I wanted to start making movies about women and their lives.
So, what motivated your decision to transition from acting in movies to creating them?
I think being put under contract as an actor to Columbia Pictures, Screen Gems, as it was, the section of TV section of Columbia. And I was there for 6 months, making very good money that they were paying. It was the first money I really made in show business. But doing guest starring on The Flying Nun and Gidget and a TV show that was so silly and meaningless that I thought this is not what as a grown-up and a person interested in art, this is just contributing more to the nonsense. And I have to start making movies. And so I did everything I could. It took me 10 years, but to try to get to a position. And thanks to Easy Rider, which was a movie that Bert Schneider had produced and my friend Jack Nicholson starred in, and Dennis Hopper had directed. But I was hired by Bert. Jack and I were hired to edit the film down from its 3.5 hour length that Dennis was at that moment insisting on it being. And that got me everything. I made a film that was commercially, I was a significant factor, I should say, in the making of a film that became a commercial hit. And therefore, I got a chance to direct my first film, which was A Safe Place, with Orson Welles, Jack, and Tuesday Welles.
In 1976, Henry, you made a powerful movie called Tracks, starring Dennis Hopper and Dean Stockwell, which is one of the first films to explore the psychological impact of the Vietnam War. Chris Wade wrote a book about the making of that film. He described it as a lost classic and said that the public wasn't ready to deal with this issue at that time. Do you think you were ahead of your time back then?
I guess so. I mean, it was very hard to get audiences. Not even that. It was hard to get distribution. I took it all to all this. There were then 7 or 8 studios. There were no independent distributors then. Hollywood was still locked into this studio game. And each one of them ran the film. I sat there in the back of the theater along with the people who ran these different studios. And none of them wanted to pick up the film because it wasn't a commercial film. And it's as you know, if you've seen Tracks, it's an emotional exploration of what goes on inside the feelings of a person who's thrown out of the system America having lost its way emotionally and with the Vietnam War.
Henry, you've been recognized as a strong feminist, and there's an obvious component in your work that advocates for fairness and justice. Do you see theater and cinema as a mechanism or
Absolutely.
avenue for social justice and for inspiring goodness in the world?
Uh, I, I don't know about goodness. That's maybe too high an ideal, but certainly as a factor that makes people feel things about themselves, that opens themselves up to their feelings and their concerns that otherwise they might not pay attention to. I think that's the obligation for me. Either you want to just entertain, or you want to entertain but do something a little deeper, a little more meaningful. And I think the thing you can do, and the filmmakers I love are the ones who have done that, is stimulate people into thinking more about society and the rules of life and what they go through and what they have to be really want, what they have to be dealing with in life. And especially to make people feel less isolated. Less, the women were feeling for so long like they were privately going through all the angst and anxieties they were going through because movies, popular culture, was not reflecting back their lives on them. They were made, those were films made by men, and they were being sold to frequently to adolescent men, who were the biggest box office contributors. And I just thought, well, I want to make films about real people and women and women's lives, and films that women will want to go to and tell some kind of truth to that.
You have a very keen sense of comedy and satire. What drives your sense of humor, do you think?
I like you saying that because I started out as a comedian. Bob Hope was my first hero, and I wanted to be Bob Hope. Then I wanted to be Jerry Lewis. It might sound funny for those of you who know my films that are more serious emotionally and deeper in terms of the exploration of all the feelings of life, but comedy is what got me in. Richard Pryor and I used to stand up every single night at the Improvisation in New York when it was at its first place on between 44th and 45th and 8th Avenue. We would just get up they wouldn't let us up early with the name comics were there. But Richie Pryor and I got to work starting about 1:30 in the morning with a few drunks and a few taxi drivers and a couple of hookers, whoever happened to be there at that time, and working on being, trying to make them laugh, trying to bring them in. And it appealed to me enormously. But I thought, what's missing here? The only thing that's really missing is women and women's lives. And that's why, so when I got a chance to make a movie, and that was only because of my contribution to Easy Rider that I got that chance to make a movie, I wanted to tell the truth about a woman's life. And that's why I got Tuesday Weld, who had done this for me Karen Black had played it as a play at the Actors Studio, and Tuesday did A Safe Place. And that's how I started working on film and realizing I had an opportunity to really show the lives of women on screen in all their extraordinary complications and in my opinion, the delights of women's lives and the sadnesses of women's lives.
Well, while we're on the topic of comedy, Henry, I have to mention one of my favorite movies, Festival in Cannes, which captures both the magnificence and the phoniness of the film industry. So tell me, Henry, I have to ask you this question. How did a man who dedicated his whole life to truth, authenticity, and honesty, how did you survive in the world of show business?
I don't know if I did survive. I've been on the edges quite a bit of society here because my films don't get distributed in the kind of mainstream way. They go to so-called art houses where more selective audiences maybe are interested in seeing more intelligent and interesting films. I don't think I'm mainstream at all. I'd love to be. Every inch of mainstream that I can be means I'm making contact with more people. But I think there was always, and I think the existence now of so many women directors proves it, that there was always room and a desire for films that more authentically showed our lives. But it wasn't good box office, so it didn't make sense because they were, as one head of a studio told me, he wants to get every 12-year-old in Iowa to see his movie, and he can't screw that up. It has to be aimed at the right demographic. And my films sadly weren't, as he told me.
Well, one of the things I think you really have achieved that I don't even know if you're aware of by making movies that really help us explore and understand women's lives, you've helped men understand women.
Women who are willing to look at that and who are open to really exploring and paying attention. Yes, I've had some of the most gratifying letters and emails and so on from not so much from men, but from the women who have told me about the effect on their lives and the effect on their relationship with the men in their lives. It's been very gratifying to feel that there's a great market out there. It's half of humanity, and don't take this wrong, but it's the feeling half. It's the more sensitive half. It's the more explorative half that has not been fed in the movies until recent decades. And I hope I contributed to some degree to opening that up and making it a more a business, if you want to call it that, or an industry, or whatever it is they call it, that is open to now, as you see, all these women artists, the directors and the producers and the writers who are women who are making films about their lives. But nobody was doing it then. Nobody.
I absolutely loved your movie Deja Vu. It's a very romantic drama that's reminiscent of the movies of the 40s. What inspired you to write that story?
I'll tell you very simply. I wanted to get my wife back. My wife left me. My first wife left me. That's who's playing in the movie. I'm playing myself and she is playing herself. Patrice Townsend, who starred in that opposite me, was my wife at the time and had informed me, sadly, that she was leaving, that the marriage was over. I couldn't understand why. So I said, would you do me a big favor? Let's make a movie about it. She said, what? How can we make a movie? I said, I don't know. We'll shoot it here in the house. We'll create let's say a 4th of July party where all kinds of people gather, and we'll try to explore why you're leaving me. Really find out what it is that I'm not doing or not giving you, what I'm needing that I'm not getting, what maybe you're needing that you're not getting. Let's look at that. And she was willing to do it and gave a great performance, I think. But then she left me, so it didn't stop. It didn't do what I wanted it to do, which was stop her from leaving. And she's mentioned the fact that years later she might have had a different reaction, but she was still very young, and there are certain factors you can't overcome. But it was trying to tell the truth again on film, only in this case, centered in my sadness, my desperate sadness. And Orson Welles was the one, when I started crying my eyes out, if you want to know truthfully, when she was starting to leave and saying, what am I going to do? He said, what can you do? You're a movie maker. Make a movie about it. It was Orson who said that. And I went to three different studios and a couple of producers. None of them wanted to make a movie. So I made my first independent movie that way. And I think it worked pretty nicely. I've gotten so much communication from all over the world, especially from women telling me that the film has great importance for them, and men, and more men than I would have thought.
Oh, Deja Vu, for anyone out there who has not seen it, you've got to see it.
Thank you.
Not only because of what Henry's just told us, but I have to ask you, what was it like working with the amazing Vanessa Redgrave?
Oh, that's a nice question. She was obviously a hero of mine because of her great work artistically, not because of her Trotskyism or whatever that is exactly. That's not my cup of tea. But she was this great film artist. And when I met her, I arranged to meet her. She said, I don't think I'm interested in doing this kind of work. And we started talking, and I mentioned to her something about the attachment I had in my life to World War II when I was a baby, the songs, the music, the White Cliffs of Dover. And then she told me that song, the White Cliffs of Dover, had so much effect on her. And she described herself as a baby in the hospital and a soldier. And I somehow, luckily, happily, got her interested in trying to make a movie that looked at the dynamic of this whole process. And she gave me, as you know, a wonderful performance. Yeah.
Oh, she really did. Okay, Henry, I know you knew this was coming. I'm going to ask you about your friendship with Orson Welles. First
I always
of all,
love talking about Orson. No
you
problem.
made 3 movies with him: A Safe Place, Someone to Love, and The Other Side of the Wind. In fact, He was in the first movie you ever directed, A Safe Place. That must have been very intimidating for you at the beginning, no?
I, probably I have a lack of sensitivity at some level. I don't get intimidated. People,
Really?
no, I don't have any capacity for intimidation. And somebody said, "Who do you want to play this?" I said, "I want this guy who's like a magician and a magic figure." And who's the biggest magic figure in movies is Orson Welles. It's like he's the fantasy of movie making and everything. So they said, well, he'll never do it. He doesn't work without scripts. And at that time, I hadn't yet had the script. I said, well, I know I want him to play this. And I said, where is he? And my friend Peter Bogdanovich told me he was in New York at the Plaza Hotel. So I flew to New York and I knocked on his door. And I said, I want to come in. And he said, I don't have an appointment with you. And he said, I know, but I've just flown. I said, I just flew 3,500 miles to see you and I'm not leaving. And he said, well, that's ridiculous. You can't do that, you know, and have you made a movie? I said, no, my first movie is going to be starring you. So he opened the door and looked at me very suspiciously. And I had to talk my way in. I almost did the thing of putting the foot at the door, you know, and just he couldn't slam the foot on that door. And I got in there and I started describing whatever I could, making up a story about what I wanted. And I knew I wanted him to play this magician, because the way he's been a magician figure in the movies over all of those of us who want to make movies, he's been this magical figure with Citizen Kane and with his whole magical life. So I started talking to him and I saw he was responsive because I knew he did magic. So I knew he would be responsive to the magician thing. And he looked at me, he said, where is this magician from? I said, I don't know, some Eastern European country. He should have an accent. I think he should be Jewish and like from East Europe. And he said, can I wear a hat? And I knew I had him. Can I wear a hat? That was the seal. That sealed the deal. He became my closest friend for the next 15 years. We had lunch twice a week at least at Ma Maison restaurant, and he helped me enormously during the editing of my first film with him before he died, which was his last film. Anyway, and there's this book that you've got featured here, My Lunches with Orson. Oh, I didn't even notice that.
Yeah, I have that book there because for anyone who doesn't know what that book is about, it provides the recordings that Henry made of his conversations at regular lunches with Orson Welles. First of all, just out of curiosity, I have to ask, who paid for those lunches?
Orson. He never let me pay for anything. He wouldn't let me pay for I just can't, you know, we took a taxi a couple of times and I always tried just to make it physically easier on him. He would never let me pay for anything. In the decade we were very close.
So why did you record those conversations? What gave you the idea to do that?
He did, because he said to me, you know, there's so many stories and so much I won't remember. He said, why don't you, he said, record our lunches so that later, when I can't make movies anymore and I can write my autobiography, I'll have all my stories that I tell you down on tape. But sadly, he didn't live long enough for that. So I had them taped originally for him to use when he was going to, after he could no longer make movies, you know, and sadly, because of his health and his size, he didn't live past 70.
He died in 1985. The book came out in 2014. What took so long to release those tapes?
You have to remember what I said was that I taped him for him to make a book. I didn't think of myself making a book, and he was now gone. He had died. So they just stayed in the you know, somewhere in my office in the corner in some briefcases and so on until this very, you know, smart writer editor, you know, said to me, you know, what about those tapes? And I said, what about them? He said, why don't I make them into a book? And I said, great, here they are. I had nothing to do with it.
Well, Orson Welles was known for being very cutting and he could be rude when he talked about some people. Did you
Unfortunately,
have to edit out
no,
some of his comments for the book?
no, I just absolutely refused. No, I had nothing to edit. I was allowed to, I'm not allowed. I insisted that if the book be published, it have everything in it that he wrote, that he said. I didn't want him to be edited. I wanted people to get to know what a complicated, sweet, troubled, difficult, angry, darling of a man this was. And I thought nothing is a better way to show it than his own words when he doesn't think anybody's going to be reading them or hearing them. And I think the book really shows you, who Orson was in his heart, even though he was a little harsh and dismissing and saying things about a lot of people, but it was truthful, very truthful. And that if anybody wants to really know who Orson Welles was, that's the book to get.
Oh, absolutely. That is the book to get. I found it fascinating. I couldn't put it down. Now, you've already said publicly that other than Lee Strasberg, the most influential person in your life was Orson Welles. Are you able to tell me, Henry, what was it specifically about him that impacted you the most?
Wow, I've been talking about Orson for so many years, but nobody has asked me that simple question, that simple, direct, emotionally intelligent question, which is what made me motivated to. You mean, why was I so affected by him, or why did I want to write about him specifically? I mean, he was this amazing filmmaker.
But your friendship with him impacted you on a very deep level.
Of course.
He was a major influencer in the way you think, in your perspectives, in your creativity, in your values. So I'm just wondering.
Mainly in that he taught me not to compromise at all. He didn't compromise, and he suffered from it. I have not suffered from it because I didn't have the same kind of ambition. He said about himself, he once said to me, "You're lucky, Henry. You want to make films with a group of people sitting around in a room talking, and I want to be like lead elephants across Rome, and and have huge sort of events take place on film, and that takes a lot of money." He said, "You're very lucky with because I never had any ambition in that regard. As you know, my films frequently are, 1 or 2 locations, 3 locations, and it's about what's going on inside, not what's outside."
I'm going to ask you another simple question. The book reveals a man, Orson Welles, who was not only witty, but rather bitter about life and disappointed with the impact of money and success on creativity. So my question to you, Henry, is this. Did Orson Welles teach you anything about how to find satisfaction in your work and in your life?
No, I can't say that he did that. I've been very lucky that I derive satisfaction from my work, and I have from the beginning. So it was just a struggle to get the films made because I knew that the satisfaction was in making the films. No, Orson didn't. No, he never pushed that. What he pushed was that he knew I had a creative drive and that I should look to getting that creative drive up on the screen. He was very encouraging, but I don't think he had any impact on me in that area. Only in the desire to get the truth up there, like he got in his films. He did not compromise. That's why he was not commercially successful after Citizen Kane. None of his films made money. So he taught me that what's important is the film, not the economic circumstances of the film. And that in Hollywood, that's a very weird lesson. Nobody tells you this.
What was he like to direct?
Well, in my first film, he was a nightmare because I was a kid, of 30, whatever it was, 31. He didn't know who I was exactly, that I had bamboozled him into this thing by telling about a magician. I don't know. And he was not very flexible. And I got the performance I wanted out of him because what I wanted was the illusion he was creating of this European gentleman who tells stories as a storyteller. So that was perfect. But as we got to know each other more, he started getting ambitious about telling more of the truth on film, his own personal truth, which he said he never was interested in. That was bullshit. He, of course, was very interested in it, but he didn't think it was okay. I made him feel it was okay, I think, to go on about yourself, try to make movies about your own needs and stuff. I think that had a positive influence on him, but unfortunately, we couldn't get financing I got him to write a whole new movie that was extraordinary. That would have been about the way Citizen Kane was about America at the turn of the century. This would have been about America at the turn of the next century into the 21st century. I couldn't get a single studio or a single producer to go for it. And I finally got I finally got this Israeli producer, Arnon Milchan, a really nice guy and helpful, to put up $8 million to make a small, for Orson's, that would be a small film in which he could do that if I could get one of 8 movie stars to make that film viable economically. And I went to each of, including some of my closest friends, and for one reason or another, I couldn't get that made. You know, I mean, everybody had a good reason of their own. My favorite was, I don't think Warren will mind my telling this, Warren Beatty, who said, God, you know, listen, would you tell Orson this for me? He said, I feel like a person who's been up all night, fucking their mind out, going crazy, fucking one woman after another. And then I come out of this whorehouse in the morning, and there stands Marilyn Monroe with her arms wide open. I'd love to, but I just can't, because I've been up all night doing all this useless stuff. He said, I really just tell Warren, and Warren, to his eternal credit, seemed to get it. He really seemed to understand that.
He should have pushed himself.
I agree. I've always been in favor of every artist pushing themselves.
Yeah, he should have pushed himself. I assume you've seen the documentary, Who is Henry Jaglom?
Yeah, sure.
What did you think of it?
I loved it because I felt exposed in all kinds of private ways, which I thought those 2 guys who did it did a great job. They were intrusive, they were annoying, everything that a documentary filmmaker should be. And I thought I love it. I think it's a very, very fine piece of work.
I'm glad you said that, because I felt like I really got you after I saw that movie. You know what I mean by that? I really got what you're really about and why Lee Strasberg mattered so much to you, because you've dedicated your life to truth and authenticity in a way that's very rare, I think.
Yeah, I guess so. And again, Orson was a tremendous influence on that, because his life was dedicated to truth and authenticity, his work.
What did you think of Chris Wade's book entitled Film Close Up, The Cinema of Henry Jaglom?
I haven't read it yet. Chris hasn't sent me a copy.
Oh, you got to read it. I loved it.
Oh, good. You read it. You're the first person I've spoken to who's read it.
Yeah, I think he really understands what you're trying to achieve in your films. And there's an intimacy about your movies. When you're sitting watching a Henry Jaglom movie, you're learning about yourself. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but that's how.
Absolutely. Not only makes sense, that's the goal. What I'm hoping to accomplish is that the people sitting in the theater or on television, wherever they're watching the film, are relating all of that to their own inner lives, so their own complications, because it comes from my own inner life and my own exploration that I want to make these films, obviously, and my fascination with the human condition. And so if his book makes you feel that, that's very, very nice to know.
Now, before I ask you about the book you're writing, which is a brief history of the Jewish people, as well as a family memoir, I have to ask you about my favorite Henry Jaglom movie, Train to Zakopane, which is an intensely personal, very powerful, true story about your father's encounter in 1928 with an anti-Semitic woman he met on a train in Poland, and he becomes smitten with her. We actually get to see your father in the movie. I love that. Tell me about your decision to make that movie, Henry, please.
Well, I could not have made it while my father was alive. He would have been furious. So one day in my adulthood, somewhere in the 1970s, we were in the living room of their apartment, my parents' apartment in New York. And my mother was in another room, and my father started telling me the story. I'd never heard about that, about how he had this love affair. And I remember saying to him, does mommy know about this? And he said, not necessarily. And I realized, oh my God, he hasn't spoken about this. And after he died, years after he died, I've been haunted by that story. And it also captures something about his young life in Poland in the late 1920s, when he's going across the country by train on the way back to Warsaw from somewhere, and he meets this Polish nurse in the Polish army, this Polish girl who's a nurse in the army, who says to him in the middle of the conversation that she can smell a Jew a kilometer away. And he decides, as he elegantly put it to me, so I decided then and there, when I heard her say that, that I would kiss the girl and then tell her that I'm Jewish. So that's what the movie's about. So it's a true story. There's nothing made up in that movie.
It's not just about anti-Semitism in, the late 20s in
No.
Poland, when we all know what was about to happen with the
Right.
Holocaust. It's about how he chose to deal with the anti-Semitism, the lesson that he taught her, the impact on her. And of course, there's another woman in the train, and I don't want to give anything away, but we get a surprise there. It's a brilliant film. I encourage everyone to see this masterpiece called Train to Zakopane. And I've got to ask you this,
And
Henry,
it stars my wife, Tana Frederick.
who's fabulous.
She did it as a play for a year here in Los Angeles. Yeah.
Do you have the ring that she gave
No.
your father?
No, the ring went up. My father left the ring in a safe that he had in his London office when we came to America, right on the eve of World War II. We came here September 1st, the Germans invaded Poland. September 3rd, our boat left London for Canada.
Wow.
It was the last boat out, literally, from every European. It was trying to get back to, anyway, no, because the ring, the Blitz then followed in London, and the building in which the ring was, the office building in which the ring was inside a safe, was destroyed by the Blitz. So no, I never got that ring. But I love that story, of course. And I love the fact that I got a performance out of he wouldn't have called it that, of course, but I used the actual footage of my father telling me bits and pieces of the story. And he narrates that film at 96 years old. So that was pretty cool.
It's
He would have
really,
hated it. He would have hated it for him to be exposing the most intimate things. And
I thought it was so touching. Now, let me ask you about the book you've been working on for the last 30 years. What inspires you to write this book?
When my parents died, they had a great painting collection of impressionist and post-impressionist great artists, great paintings. And they gave them all to the Tel Aviv Museum. And the museum built a special annex for the films of Marie and Simon Jaglom, for the impressionist and expression and post-impressionist films. And that's where they are, in Tel Aviv, at the Tel Aviv Museum. At the opening of that museum, they asked me for the brochure, which I have, this brochure with a lot of the paintings copied in the brochure, to write an introduction about my parents. I'd never tried to do that before, so I wrote 8-9 pages. My father died in 92. I think the museum opening was 93. So what is it from 93 till now? 30 years or plus, whatever that is.
Yeah.
I've been working on that book, and I'm finally finishing it, except for Putin and Zelensky, our hero Zelensky, this great hero.
Yes.
Until this gets resolved with Ukraine, because my father was born in Ukraine, and what's going on in Ukraine and Russia is so significant now that I can't end the book without knowing what the end of the story is, because it'll be dated immediately. So I'm waiting for, I'm trying to get Putin and Zelensky to get together in order so that I could finish my book, please.
Right. From your mouth to God's ears.
Right, really.
Now, I know this may seem silly. Forgive me, Henry, but do you think that by writing the book and setting out your family history in writing, that you've somehow made those experiences more real?
I think it's a terrific question. That's to ask any artist, actually, whether performing that particular art about that subject makes that subject more real is a very powerful and significant question, and an interesting question. And nobody's asked me that, by the way, which I always like when it's a question that more real? You're saying more real.
it to make you believe that it really happened, like not just therapeutic for you, but to make those experiences solid, concrete.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess so. I never thought in terms of that, but it makes a lot of sense. Probably, yeah. Certainly, working on this book has made my parents' lives much more real to me. You know, it's wonderful because I found so much from so many relatives and so many histories and all the different things that I never would have put together. And as I read and work on the book, I'm constantly reintroducing myself to stuff about my parents and getting to know them better. And my mother's stories in there are just wonderful. My father's he almost narrates the book in some way. You know, it's quite valuable, I think, for me, but hopefully also for others, because I think it really captures that period in Jewish history. But also I try to go back to the whole history from the beginning of Jewish history, and it's like 3,000 to 4,000 years of stuff. And it's I'm very happy, enormously happy, and fascinated by what's going to happen when it comes out and how to best bring it out. I'm just in the process of trying to think all of that. But until Zelensky and Putin get it together, I have no way of finishing this. So I'd appreciate it if you tell them to speed it up.
Boy, oh boy, I wish I could. Well, I would appreciate it if you promise to come back on the show when the book does come out, because I
Absolutely.
would love to talk with you about that.
Aren't you nice? Absolutely. It would be my pleasure.
Well, in our remaining moments, I have to mention our very dear mutual friend, the brilliant songwriter Harriet Schock, who very kindly facilitated this interview. I'm so
And
grateful.
songwriter and actress in my movie.
Yes,
You know, she acted really wonderful, did a great performance.
she is so multi-talented. I just adore her, and I'm so grateful that she put me in touch with you, Henry.
Oh, thank you. That's
Now,
my pleasure.
as you know, Harriet is a great teacher, and you've done some teaching in recent years. Do you enjoy teaching?
Love acting, teaching. Teaching acting is I discovered it very late in life, and I absolutely love it. Love it. It because I see these things happening in people as they come alive to themselves, to parts of themselves that I'm able to very much as you would expect it to be based upon Strasberg and the method and the actor's studio and the true in use of yourself as fully emotionally and historically as you possibly can, getting as much touch with yourself as possible and then sharing it as openly as possible in the characters you're playing. And it's been enormously gratifying to see people go from certain degree of discomfort on stage to great revelation about themselves. It's a wonderful process. I love it. I just very, very, very pleased to find myself at this stage in my life teaching.
I think it's a wonderful tribute to Lee and to Orson.
Oh, oh, that's nice. I hadn't even thought of that. That's so obviously good that you know you're great. That's good. You give me an overview, which is so no, that's enormously helpful to have somebody put you in a place not just inside of yourself, but in a context, an overview context. Yes, I think that's probably right. That certainly is right.
Well, I have only one more question for you, Henry Jaglom, who I absolutely love. How would you like to be remembered?
Remembered
Yeah,
by who?
the public, the world.
I don't know. I don't have that sort of pretensions. I try a truth teller. You know, I just hope that I'm telling the truth. A lot of people are told a lot of stories that is not the truth, and I think that's injurious, that's harmful to them in their lives. They expect things that have nothing to do with reality because people aren't talking real stuff to them. And I hope that telling the truth is substantially the best thing you can possibly do, and it can help break through a lot of walls and a lot of prisons that people are trapped in and different ideas about what shoulds and shouldn't be. And if you just tell the truth, everybody's life is a complicated mishmash of all these things. And our job, I think, is to share it as much as truthfully as much as we possibly can.
Well, Henry, I want to thank you for giving so much of yourself to all of us through your writing, your directing. You're such an inspiration, not only to the actors you've worked with, but to your audience. You've
Thank
helped us learn who we are. And I thank you so much for taking the time to appear on our show.
I couldn't be happier. Thank you for the nature and the level of this kind of conversation. It's a pleasure.
Our guest has been the renowned filmmaker, playwright, and author Henry Jaglom. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you to our producer, Steve Silver, my wonderful managers, Rick and Robin at the Marcelli Company in LA, and to my entire team at the XPTV1 studio in the UK. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.